It's true. The first time I visited this group, but of course, over the decades, I've always known about Berkeley demography and huge admiration. And I have a PhD in sociology, but I've never claimed to be anything other than a demographer. And for a demographer, Berkeley demography is holds a very special place. So thanks very much for the invitation. And I've really enjoyed all my discussions and meetings so far, totally. So, now, let's see, just a bit of preface about this talk. I have a feeling it's, I could be wrong, but somewhat different than you usually get. It's, you might label it comparative historical work. It's modeling of data at the country level. Although all my indicators are built from individual level survey data, but the modeling is all country level. So, there were two parts here, but now understanding my time limits, I think I'll get to the second part, which is only about a quarter or a third of the presentation, which is a more contemporary and looking forward. It's about African fertility declines, sub-Saharan African fertility declines, and where they might be going. I'm not sure I'll get to that. So the talk I'm going to give you is mostly looking back. My goal here has been to understand what's happened the last 4 or 5 decades in a whole set of countries, Latin America, Asia, Africa. This has kind of been where I've been working for some decades. And there's mountains of research. You would think we have a very clear understanding of what's occurred. But I don't think so. I find a lot of what I consider fairly basic questions, basic issues are not understood, or the current wisdom that's out there is actually incorrect, which is what I'm going to show you today, at least a take of that sort. So I see myself fulfilling a certain kind of scholarly responsibility, which is to get the record right for generations forward. So I guess that sounds presumptuous, doesn't it? But anyway, that's the mission here. So let's see, do I know how to advance this? Should I just use the...
Use the arrows or that
What's the simplest? Is this going to be simple?
You go full screen.
Oh, let's go full screen here. What's the full, where's the full screen going to be?
Do you know, Michelle?
Control something is going to be full screen. Yeah, I think it's PowerPoint, but I made it PDF, so there we go. Is that going to work?
It's still the same. We could, I don't know if we want to actually waste time on this, but we could do the switch.
It's probably viewable for everybody.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, start just because I don't want this to get lost at the end. I do have people to thank. I've had about 5 years of support from the Gates Foundation, ended last December. So that's made a big difference for me. I benefit by the NICHD Central Grant that my center, Institute for Population Research at Ohio State has. And they're individuals. I've mentioned here my long-term Egyptian collaborator, Laila El-Zaini, postdoctoral fellow, Mobolaji Ebitoye, who is now at Rutgers University. Laila's at the Cairo University, and then John Bongartz. By the way, to say that John Bongartz and I differ quite, we differ on some of the points I'm making today. And we've had a lot of exchange, and I've benefited from that. So although he and I don't agree, I think I've gained in what I'm presenting today is gained from that exchange. So it's an example of scholarly disagreement benefiting, I hope, both sides, at least me. Goals today, 2 parts, as I said. The first is providing a portrait of what's happened in fertility declines outside of Africa from the 1970s to the present. And the second is to consider how things might proceed in sub-Saharan Africa. And we'll see if I get to the second, how much you want to talk and how efficient I am in my presentation. Throughout, fertility desires is a central interest, central phenomenon. And in particular, the distinction between wanted and unwanted fertility is fundamental to what I'm doing. And I don't know if some of you would have doubts about that, misgivings about that conceptual distinction, but in any case, to proceed today, we have to take that as a real thing, as a meaningful distinction. So there's been a long-standing debate. It goes back, well, 4 or 5 decades, at least, and certainly intensified in the 1990s. what has been the principal source of fertility decline in these countries in the period since, let's say, 1950, and in these low and middle income countries? This, by the way, this presentation says nothing about, I have nothing here about East Asia, North America, Europe. So has it been a matter of decline in the desired number of children or greater success in achieving existing desires, that is, greater success in avoiding unwanted births? The first one is sometimes called the demand explanation, and the second is sometimes called the implementation explanation. So if it's the former, then for sure the driver is economic and social changes of all sorts. If it's the latter, then at least there's some contribution that should be recognized and given credit for adoption of more effective birth control. So conditional, kind of holding equal fertility desires and social and economic changes is simply exercising more effective birth control, part of the story. So that's been a debate.
Can I ask just a big picture? Why does it matter which is the bigger one, since they both probably matter?
Yeah. I can't go back, can I? Or can I? Let's see. Yeah. Well, certainly this came to a head with debates about how much to invest of public funds in family planning services, family planning supplies and services.
But as long as they're not zero, then as long as one of these isn't zero, then you just kind of, what's the relative return on investment? That's the question, not what's the principal source.
Well, I think the weighting matters just for understanding what's occurred. And I'll anticipate, you'll see I come out that there's a lot more credit should be given to this more effective avoidance of unwanted births. So and that's a different understanding of what's happened in the last 4 or 5 decades. So it's certainly a matter of scientific understanding. Now, real world implications, because of course you're right, both things are occurring, and any case on all sorts of grounds one wants to invest in family planning services. So you could say that that reduces, I suppose, the salience of the debate. So appropriate doubts on your part. Where was I? So we have this 1994 article, PDR by Lant Pritchett, which really brought this all to a head. Work I think he did while he was at the World Bank, working under Larry Summers, by all accounts. And he made the claim that the whole story here is declining desired number of children, change in fertility desires, that the implementation side, the adoption of contraception, is simply a mechanism for the carrying out of fertility desires, and differentials in implementation make very small net contribution. So I will say, and a certain crowd that I used to move in, kind of international family planning crowd, this article had singular notoriety. It's almost kind of a curse word to say Pritchett. People hated this article because he really did say that, really very explicitly argued against there being much rationale for investing in a major way in family planning services. And his main evidence, he did actually, I think it's a magnificent piece. And whenever I return to it, I'm always impressed. He has various pieces of evidence, but his main evidence is a set of country-level regressions of actual fertility on desired fertility. Here we have desired fertility. Here we have the observed fertility. It's a period TFR. And he shows a very tight relationship. He's got an R-squared of 0.91. And his point is that fertility marches down as desired fertility marches down. And they go hand in hand, kind of almost a step at a time. Well, so I'm saying here, yeah, that's an impressive association, I suppose. These are all country level values. And some countries appear twice. There's no here, this is not longitudinal. It's simply kind of cross-sectional scatter plot. Yeah, that's an impressive relationship, but I think I could show you, in fact, for previous versions of the presentation, I put forward a bunch of other scatter plots of different things that also show very tight association with the period TFR that lead you to a very different kind of conclusion. So I don't think that in itself is settles the case. Taking this a bit further, what exists in the current literature, a common approach is to take the period TFR and break it into two pieces. This is a little bit of very elementary methodology. There's what's called a wanted TFR and an unwanted TFR. And these are rates that have been calculated now for many decades, but they're always in the reports of DHS and so forth. They're out there all the time. And TFR is simply the sum of the two. And for both of those, the wanted and unwanted rate, the denominator is all women. It's just the numerator. One of the numerator is births that are wanted. You have to have some algorithm to tell you what's wanted or unwanted, but we won't get into that. And then you have other births that are unwanted. So, and based on this breakdown, you can do a decomposition, really elementary decomposition of trends in the TFR and break it down into contributions of wanted and unwanted fertility. This has been done a lot. And the custom in the literature is to say that the wanted TFR contribution reflects changes in fertility desires. And the unwanted contribution reflects improvement in the achievement of fertility desires, more effective birth control. So that exercise has been done. Pritchett did it in 1994. David Lamb did it in his PA presidential address. Gunther Hartgen did it in a piece published in Demography. And John Bogarts has done it again in a piece posted about 2 weeks ago. Well, I think there's an enormous problem with this approach. I've always felt that, for a long time, I felt that this was defective conceptually. Now, empirically is another question, but conceptually. The problem is that this wanted TFR, it's simply the ratio of births that are categorized as wanted over all women. Well, this wanted TFR is not a direct measure of fertility desires. I mean, I don't think it even pretends to be, really. For one thing, it's affected by the extent of unrealized fertility. Some desired fertility does not occur. And so trends in the wanted TFR don't reflect trends in unrealized fertility. It's affected by the age of first birth. The one total fertility rate will decline if women start their childbearing later. So that will affect trends in the wanted TFR. And it's affected by the length of birth intervals. As women space births longer periods, longer durations, this WTFR will decline. So movement in the WTFR reflects, at least conceptually, reflects a lot of phenomena, a lot of behaviors other than the fertility desires per se. So my view, this is a fundamentally flawed approach to this whole question of what's driving fertility change. Is it changes in desires or changes in achievement of those desires? Certainly this unwanted TFR, changes in that do reflect a certain part of the change in the, it reflects an achievement of desires, of your desires, but it's only a partial capturing of that. So I'm going to propose an alternative model. And then, yeah.
Just a small point. It feels like if you're collecting fertility and desired fertility contemporaneously, it's pretty clear there could be endogeneity.
Yeah.
I may rationalize, my fertility by saying, oh yeah, I desired, I have 3 kids. Oh, that's exactly what I desired. So it just feels like you're artificially going to boost the correlation, the association between those two terms, because people don't want to admit their kids are unwanted. They want to rationalize their own life choices or life outcomes. So collecting them contemporaneously feels very problematic, just methodologically. But just for me,
Yeah. So
like to your point, you're going to have this artificially high correlation and say, hey, it's all desired, but that could just be ex post.
So I grant that. I think Ted's given another problem down here with this wanted TFR, although your critique probably only applies to what I'm about to do. So, but I think you all heard what.
I'm not saying there's no signal. I'm just saying
Right.
there could be some additional association driven by that
Sure.
rationalization.
Yeah, and I mean, this wanted and unwanted TFR derived. Different people use different methods. So you're referring to this, how many children do you want your whole life? I call the ideal number of children item. And that provides a basis for deciding whether recent births have been wanted or unwanted. There are other ways to get that job done too. So, but that's one way. And I liked your recent article, by the way. from Kenya. It was on the measurement problems there. Yeah. So I'm going to suggest an alternative model that I think is analytically more sound than what we've had so far. And then I'm going to apply it and see what answer I get in this question of what's driving, what are the mechanisms driving fertility decline. So we have a few slides here that are methodology. I think it's pretty elementary. I hope it doesn't confuse you. I'm not a very sophisticated technician. So we have two proportions, a proportion ever in union and what I call preference composition, as we break the in union women into whether they want another child or not. So the attitudinal item that I'm relying on and everything I do here today is, going forward now, is this question asked of women in a survey, would you like another child? There's a follow-up then about how soon you'd like it, but would you like another child? Kind of a simple yes/no item. So that's what I'm relying on. So we have whether women are in union or not, and we have whether women in union want another child or not. Then we have three rates of childbearing. We have a fertility rate among those who are never in union, of course, very low in most places, or low most places. We have a fertility rate among the want more women. That's what I will call wanted fertility rate. And we'll have a fertility rate among the no more women. Now, these two rates down here, they have restricted denominators as compared to the, as I mentioned, the wanted and unwanted TFR, the denominator is all women. These rates restrict the denominator to women who are actually at risk of that type of birth. This to me seems like a sound way to proceed. So these conditional rates basically introduced or reintroduced the literature and piece I have in demography in 2022. Now the Guttmacher kind of data machine has picked this up. So Barrick et al. Have a piece in 2023. This is interesting. This RWRU, you could say, is kind of an obvious thing to do. Yet nobody's been calculating these. And my own explanation is that starting 30 plus 40 years ago, research switched so much to individual level survey data. And with individual level survey data, if you calculate a TFR for, say, the 3 years before the survey, allocating that exposure time between wanting another birth and not is a really hard exercise. It requires all sorts of detailed measurement of how women have been feeling over the last 3 years, or you have to make very strong assumptions. So I think that's why people have not been calculating this, because of handling the denominator. What we do is we work entirely at the aggregate level. And we have a numerator, which is the number of count of births that are wanted or unwanted. We have a denominator, which is the cross-sectional fraction at the survey of women who want more or do not want another child, parity and age specific. And the assumption is that that proportion, wanting or not wanting, at the time of the survey, applies over the last, well, whatever the period of time is for your TFR, let's say the last 3 years. I think all evidence is that this proportion moves slowly over time, so I think it's a safe assumption. Now, it's an interesting thing, especially given this audience. Rates of this sort were calculated in the 1970s and 80s. Ronald Lee, for example, in his research on US fertility, I don't know if you recall, but you actually calculated a rate. You calculated a rate of this sort in several of your pieces. And Westhoff and Ryder present a rate of this sort. They actually go through a very complicated allocating process, allocating exposure time to wanting and not wanting. It has some complicated algorithm. So, and John Baumgartz once in the early 90s did something along these lines. But by and large, this kind of rate has not been in the literature, even though I think for demographers, for epidemiologists, this is entirely natural thing to do, that you restrict your denominator to those who are at risk of the phenomenon. In question, in this case, it's having a wanted birth or having an unwanted birth. So, okay, so I'm touting this as a positive feature of this research. So here we have this expression. It leads to an expression for age for, oh, well, I guess that's you. Here I didn't have a formula. Yeah, so now I have a formula. And there it is. And this is an age-specific fertility rate formula. And the TFR is an weighted sum of these F. It looks a little bit convoluted, elaborate, but actually it's a rather simple expression. It's convoluted because I have to repeat this 1 minus Cn term. But basically we have three components here. A nuptiality component, which is the proportion never married times the rate of childbearing among the never married. A wanted fertility rate, which is the rate of childbearing among those who want another child, and the proportion who want another child. And an unwanted fertility rate, which is the rate of childbearing among women who don't want another child, and the proportion who don't want another child. So actually, it's got three major things here. It's actually not as difficult an expression as it might look at first glance. So based on this expression, we can have four sources of change in the period TFR. There could be more adult years spent out of union, single. That's a nuptiality component. We can have a larger fraction of years spent wanting another child versus not. That's what I will call preference composition. Kind of an awkward term. I wouldn't mind someone suggesting a shorthand. We have a decline that's due to decline in the wanted fertility rate, that is rate of childbearing among those wanting another child. And we have a decline that's due to rate of childbearing among those not wanting another child, which is the unwanted fertility rate. So four sources of change.
I don't understand why in the formula, in the second set of terms, it's not 1 minus Cn times 1 minus Cu.
What's that? It depends how you construct the CW, but what I'm trying to do here is get this becomes a fraction of all women who are married and want another child. That's what this should give you. And this gives you the fraction of all women who are married and don't want another child. It works out arithmetically. What are you not seeing?
Well, you're not removing the women who don't want another child.
What's that?
I thought there were three groups of women.
Yeah.
The women who were not in a union,
Right.
the women who are in a union and wanted another child, so
Yeah.
excluding women who do not want another child, and then the women who do not want another child, excluding.
Well, that's over here. Did I misdo my superscript? No, I don't think so. I think I have it right. RW times CW, RU times, this is 1 minus CW, which is equivalent to, you could call it CU.
Now, this is summed by age, but parity is presumably the underlying kind of causal story.
Yeah, we're going to come to that actually, and I hope you will be.
Please,
thinking
let's go.
about that. Yeah. Okay, so this supports a decomposition with four components: nuptiality, wanted fertility rate, unwanted fertility rate, and preference composition. Now, what I think the virtue here, what I will claim is an improvement on the existing literature, is that fertility desires are explicitly represented. They're represented with this preference composition. And as we proceed here, you'll see we have to think about what that reflects, actually. There's some mystery there. But at least we have the fertility desires explicitly represented. Unlike that first decomposition I showed you of the wanted TFR and unwanted TFR, where the claim was that WTFR is fertility desires, but it's not. It's not. It's by no means entirely or exclusively fertility desires. Well, I have now a component that is focused as entirely explicitly fertility desires. It's this preference composition. Okay, so I do empirical analysis. And I have a very large survey archive, about 450 surveys, but with various kinds of selection rules, what I've got for this presentation is 62 countries and decomposition of 128 inter-survey periods. So it's about 3 surveys per country. Now, 3 surveys will give you 2 inter-survey periods. And I draw from all these various survey programs, starting with the World Fertility Survey in the 1970s, 1980s, all the way up through, well, recent surveys from DHS and MICS, the multiple indicator cluster surveys. I've also collected here and there other surveys that are kind of outside these programs. So looks like this for this presentation. Here are the way I break down, I classify countries by region. We have the non-African regions, I identify 3, and the African regions identify 2. We have the years in each region, the minimum maximum year for a survey. The number of surveys is off to the far right, number of countries and number of surveys. And then in the middle here, we have 3 columns of characteristics at TFR. And the main point here is that outside of sub-Saharan Africa, the lowest surveys are down towards 2 births. This is a 10th percentile, so they're down towards 2 births per woman, so near replacement. The highest surveys are up at 5 and 6, 7. But in Africa, the lowest surveys are, not even down below 3, around 3.5 or 4. So the African fertility declines are at this stage, well, we don't know. They could be complete. Maybe they're not going to go farther. But most folks would say that African fertility declines are still in process. So I have a distinction here that I have countries with largely completed declines and countries that are only partway down. My decomposition, the rule I had for choosing inter-survey periods, surveys must be 5 years apart, no more than 25 years apart, and the TFR change must be at least half a birth. So like I said, I have 450 surveys, and here I'm only using 190 of them. So that was a selection. Okay, the method here is it's just conventional demographic decomposition using that expression I've showed you several times. I carry out the decompositions age by age. So for each age, I get a breakdown of what can be credited with fertility change, like 4 components, age by age, and then I sum it equal weights for each age to get the impact on the TFR. And formula, I use, if you know this, some of you may know this Dasgupta manual from the Census Bureau. That's kind of a very elaborate working out of how to apply what often goes to called a Kitagawa decomposition, demographic decomposition from her article in 1955. Dasgupta gives you all sorts of ways of applying that. So that's what I do. Okay, here we go. So I'll show you some results. I'm going to start with the non-sub-Saharan African declines because, as I said, they're farther progressed, historically more complete. I will show you Africa, and then we'll see whether the second portion of my talk we may not get to that. So, well, here are the results. And here's one table, but actually I replicate this table in the next slide. So that's a more complete table. But here's the key parts of the table. So I have decomposition component, nuptiality, wanted rate, unwanted rate, preference composition. And I have the 3 non-sub-Saharan African regions and all regions. And the mean TFR decline, by the way, is just a one birth per decomposition. I had a rule that there had to be at least a half a birth change, but on average, it's about 1 birth per decomposition. So what do we have here? If you study that small matrix of numbers, the winner here, I suppose, is the unwanted rate. That's the rate of childbearing among women who don't want another child. That seems to be on balance, the winner. The wanted rate, that is childbearing among women who want another child, which again can be affected by more birth control, more birth spacing, is close behind in Latin America and in, I say Arab region, meaning West Asia and North Africa. In the Arab region, nuptiality is the leading factor. And this, by the way, the literature on this is not departing from all the analyses I know of Arab fertility decline attributes a great deal of impact to nuptiality change, delaying age at first marriage, or not getting married at all. Actually, levels of non-marriage are getting high in the Arab region if you've looked at it. But here's a stunner. The preference composition, which is that bottom row, is entirely inconsequential. According to this, decomposition has contributed essentially nothing. I see Ron's expression. This is hard to believe. It's very hard to understand. I didn't, set this up to get this answer. Each time I've done this with contraception as well. Contraception change, the same thing. Preference composition hardly matters for contraceptive change. So I've been honestly wrestling with this for a couple of years now. I mean, this is what the numbers, I stand by that expression I gave you some slides ago, and I think I've worked with the data correctly, and this is what I get. Now, I do have some thoughts about this, so it's entirely consequential. It's a surprising and a stunning result. So how should we understand it? And I'll make 4 points that I guess are kind of a qualification of what we should make of this. I mean, on the face of it, change in preference composition, which I'm saying is representing change in fertility desires, has meant 0 to the fertility declines in these countries. It's all been a matter of women more successfully achieving what they want. Not changing what they want, but more successfully achieving what they want. Well, a couple of points.
I think I'm just stuck on the measurement of this. This is not, you follow a woman and you determine, does she want more or not want more, and then you look at her subsequent fertility?
No.
It's some kind of aggregate method where you
it's at the country
assign.
level. It's decomposition at the country level.
How do you know if a birth is to a woman who wanted a child or didn't want a child, since you're asking them? These are births that happen in the past.
So survey by survey, woman by woman, we have a methodology for deciding whether births are wanted or unwanted. And actually, it's a method that Lyle Zany and I developed about 15 years ago that's published in Demography.
Okay. So
there are other methods.
The birth at the time of the birth is categorized.
Yeah, woman by woman, we classify births as wanted or unwanted. But the analysis here, in the end, so we have for every woman, we have whether her recent fertility is wanted or unwanted. And that gives us for the survey as a whole, a parameter value.
And then you're asking separately now, not your past births, do you want more children or not?
Yes.
That's how you get the,
Yeah. Actually, that's what Lila and my method does, actually. It relies on the prospective preference side of it, actually. It's okay. Well, if I'll make 4 points about this. And I really enjoy, if any of you, very smart minds in the room, can help me with this, because I'm still kind of trying to get my head around this result we have, which I think is quite surprising. Well, one thing is that the measurement of preferences is crude. It's a simple dichotomy, do you want another child or not? And I think it's plausible, in fact, it's almost certainly the case, that there have been meaningful changes within that no more category. In particular, what makes sense to me is that there's a perceived higher cost of unwanted birth. So women in 1970 said, I don't want another child. And then someone else in 2010 says, I don't want another child. That woman in 2010 has much more conviction about that and perceives it being a higher cost, riskier venture to have another child. So that's really a preference composition change that we've missed. It's genuine preference change that we have not measured. So, and how to adjust our decomposition for this, I have no idea. So okay, that's one thing that kind of qualifies the result. A lot here depends on whether you think that simple question, do you want another child, what to make of that, and whether it tells most of the story about women's desires or just a very partial story. So there's a major issue here of measurement. Yes, Claude.
But it's answering to Ted's point, which is it's not contaminated by retrospective justification.
Well, now the question we're using is, do you want another child? And of course, woman already has whatever she has, 1, 2, 5 children. So I don't know what Ted was saying about kind of a certain kind of rationalization would affect that response.
Right.
Except in a very kind of subtle, complicated way. Yeah.
So I'm sorry to dwell on this, but how do you know then, how do you assign the births that just happen to be unwanted or wanted? Or you don't do that, sorry.
We do.
Oh, you do, okay. How do you?
Yeah, it's births in the last 3 years. Every birth in the last 3 years is assigned, at the individual level to woman. It is classified as wanted or unwanted.
Based on a question the woman's asked, or?
I wonder how we, I didn't mean to put you off, but Lila Nilzani and I published a method demography in 2008, I think, a methodology for doing that.
Okay.
That it's not widely used, but I think it holds up.
Okay.
And it's a little hard to explain in brief, but it basically does, its platform, its foundation is the prospective question, preference question, do you want another child? It is not the retrospective question, did you want the last child? So you wonder how in the world can we decide whether birth 2 years ago was wanted or unwanted based on whether they want another child? Well, we have a way for doing that, and you'd have to look at it and see if you believe it. Okay, we better move along here. So measuring of preferences accrued. Secondly, here is actually something that is kind of a finding. Preference composition has changed surprisingly little, and this is a fact I think it's not greatly appreciated. That is, the fraction of women who want or don't want another child. Probably you think, well, it's got to be that there's a sharp increase over time in the fraction of women who don't want another child, because desired number of children has fallen. Not so. Here's actually trends over time. This is the percent who don't want another child, want to stop, I'm calling it. And for these three regions, and yes, it's moving upward, but not very fast and not to a very large degree. So for example, if we take, what's the green line? West Asia and North Africa, from 7 births down to nearly 2, it goes up about 15 points, 15 to 20 points. Not very much change in this proportion over a fertility decline of 5 births. I'm saying going from 7 to 2. And you can look at the Latin America, the decline from about 5 to 2 or 4.5 to 2.5. There's like 5 percentage point increase in the percent who want to stop. So this preference composition changes surprisingly little over time. And this, I think, actually, with the mountains of research we have with these data, to my knowledge, it's not been recognized. I have now 2 articles that have pointed this out, and I'm showing you today. It's a fact generally not appreciated. Certainly, fertility desires have changed. We know the ideal number of children has declined. But also there's been an increase in parity-specific preferences to stop. What's happened, interestingly, is to explain this rather modest trend in this cross-sectional fraction who want to stop, is there's been a shift in parity composition toward lower parities, and it's offsetting. There's some elementary demography here that, to my knowledge, everyone who's working in this space the last couple of decades has not noticed. John Bungart's, for example, has not noticed. Why did that happen? Well, I think it's because that, and I'll show you the parity composition numbers in a moment, but shift toward lower parities because there's been later age at first birth. It means that it takes women reach certain parities at a later age, and has longer birth intervals. But this is really interesting. So I've done a decomposition of this change in the desire to stop childbearing. So here we have the total change by region, and you'll see that Latin America, it's like, this is per decade, change per decade. So in Latin America, 1 percentage point per decade, hardly moving at all. Southeast Asia, 5 percentage points per decade. West Asia, North Africa, 3 percentage points, 2.5 overall. Well, if we held constant parity, this is another elementary decomposition. If we held constant parity composition and just allow the parity-specific preferences to play out, you would get declines of this size. What's happening is parity composition is working against that. That if the increasing fraction of women who are lower parity, not higher parity. And you can see the offsetting effects, the negative signs, which tend to offset by about a half of the change that would occur otherwise. So that's, I think, a big part of the story here. It's rather, and some of you who are mathematical demographers, which I'm not, can decide how long this is going to operate, this kind of trend, this kind of process. But right now, it's been a process that women of reproductive age are increasingly at lower parities, and therefore less likely to want to stop, more likely to want a child. So that affects by decomposition, that preference composition change surprisingly little. The third point, I just have 2 more points. Unwanted fertility rate is high early in the transition. So women who, the distinction between women who want another child and don't want another child is not all that great. I mean, it should be. I think women who don't want another child would be having children at a far lower rate. And they are having, their fertility rate is lower, but not as much, I'd have to show you the numbers, not as much as you might think. So switching from wanting another child to not wanting another child has less bearing on the rate of childbearing than you might guess. Finally, we have this question of how to translate trends in desired number of children, and there are such trends, and they're downward. How to translate those into trends in the period preference composition. It's the period preference composition that's in my decomposition, and that seems to have no effect on fertility change. And this is demographic analysis I've not yet conducted. I'm still trying to get my head around how to do this. Yeah, just to say, so here are our results once again. Unwanted rate contributes a lot. Wanted rate close behind, nuptiality, and then preference composition doesn't need to go. Now, let me just show you quickly Africa, and then I think we better stop. Here I've added the results to Africa here on the far right to the previous results I've just been showing for the rest of the globe. And you can study for a moment what's going on in sub-Saharan Africa. Again, because these declines are still in process, I don't know how much we should make of this, but I suppose the main point is that this number, the preference composition contribution, is distinctly higher in sub-Saharan Africa than other regions. And that's actually entirely what I would expect because of this. These are, again, the proportion who do not want to have another child, 10% up to 60%. This is the level of the TFR. And the main point to make here is if you look at the two African regions, the solid black and the solid orange, especially the solid orange, the percent who want no more children is lower than other regions. In Middle and West Africa, it's markedly lower. So my guess is that what we're seeing here is maybe even going to emerge more strongly. And this is a way in which I think African fertility declines are going to be different. They're going to hinge much more on changing childbearing desires, changing fertility desires. Let's see, what do I have coming here next? Yeah, I'm not going to just say in this respect, if African fertility declines actually, if changing fertility desires is makes a larger contribution, is a more substantial mechanism than in other regions, there's an irony here because it makes Africa, I think, comply more closely with what we usually call demographic transition theory. That is, I think African declines are going to depend much more heavily than declines in other regions on various kind of social and economic changes. I think it's a huge irony because the usual view is that African societies are kind of the most different from European Western societies, kind of doing a comparative standpoint. But that notwithstanding, I think African declines are going to accord more closely with the demographic transition theory that was developed to explain what happened in Europe. So it's a kind of a irony. I think these implementation effects, the decline in the wanted and unwanted rates, are features of declines in Latin America, Asia, the Arab region that kind of depart in some respects from classic demographic transition theory. So let me, I'm afraid I will not get, I have some simulations of how African fertility declines might proceed. We just don't have time. So, and I sort of knew that coming in today. I made too long a presentation. So I want to just wrap up. A few takeaways. First is, I think the existing scholarship attempts to assess the fertility impact of changing fertility desires has employed defective methods. Fairly strong assertion, but I think this is correct. I would apply it to this, among other things, the piece that John Bongart's published 2 weeks ago. I think it's off base. Secondly, contemporary fertility declines in LMICs can be explained without attributing any contribution to change in fertility preference composition. It's a remarkable empirical outcome that I regard as I think this is a descriptive fact. So I take the stand as a descriptive fact. Now, we need to decide what to make of that descriptive fact, how to understand it, what are the deeper implications. But I think my decompositions stand as a descriptive fact. But further to this, the contribution of declines in desired number of children, which is also a descriptive fact, and it's here in the background in some way, is still to be accounted for. So I don't think the story is finished. I say preference composition seems to mean 0, which suggests that changes in fertility, desire, childbearing desires doesn't matter at all. I doubt that's the final story here. But we do have a result that I'll say is I think it's a descriptive fact. We have in this descriptive fact, which is my decomposition results, there are major contributions that declines in the wanted fertility rate and the unwanted fertility rate. That is, the rate of childbearing among women who want another child and among women who don't want another child. So I think this can be viewed as a story of more efficacious women's agency vis-a-vis childbearing. It's more complete achievement. Women are more successfully achieving what they want in terms of childbearing goals. And there's a universality here that, you can try to relate this to provision of birth control, contraception, various kind of policy things, and I think it's interesting to examine those kind of associations. It may be that countries that were more aggressive about providing family planning services achieved faster declines in these two rates. But there's a universality here that I think this is the right way to look at this. This is a facet of health transition in itself. I view this as a process of transformation in views and approaches to human body, human health, more receptivity to modern medicine, a whole variety of changes, of which adoption of modern methods of contraception is just this one piece. So I embed this in a story of health transition, which I think reproductive health is just one facet. Finally, it's something I didn't really get to show you in much detail, but I think in contrast to the results I've shown you for all the non-Sub-Saharan African regions, I think Sub-Saharan African declines will require a marked change in fertility preferences. I think it'll be different. Eventually, the decomposition for Sub-Saharan African regions the results will look different than I showed you today. So, okay, I'm very sorry. I think I used up all the time. Only a few questions. We do have a little bit of time. Rob. Yeah.
Terrific talk and a great way to think about this. But I have a suggestion that maybe just a different way of thinking about what you have shown. Let's imagine a counterfactual in which I think what you were calling ideal preferences, or I would call target fertility. Suppose that stays exactly the same. But what changes is greater access to contraception. Then we would expect your preference composition measure to decline a lot because women would achieve higher parities later, and so they have longer birth intervals because they had access to contraception and so on. And that's what you show as your very substantial negative parity effect in one of your tables. Now, my suggestion is then, since you'd expect under that counterfactual of constant measure of fertility targets or ideals or something like that, you'd expect a big decline in parity, but preference composition. But in fact, what you see is a rising one. Why not measure that contribution relative to what it would have been had there been no change?
Yeah, so that's very interesting suggestion. I think we could do that. So it's a certain kind of simulation.
It's just a different way of thinking about the results.
Well, it is my next step to try to figure out, as I've said several times, how we have what you call target fertility goals in terms of number of children, let's say, over a lifetime. We do have those data. And how that bears on this preference composition that's the connection I've yet to work out. And that's what you're suggesting, a way to do that, or one way to get at it.
Well, I'm saying you've already done, maybe it's more complicated than I'm saying.
Oh.
I do have some machinery for doing this that might be useful.
Oh, yeah?
That I've been, anyway, I'll send you an email after.
Oh, that's good. I'd like to. I'll be happy to steal your machine.
This may be an elementary question, but Is the African case deviant because region is relatively late, the demographic transition? As you're catching it, could the argument be that for these other countries, your data starts relatively late in their transition? Therefore, you're seeing sort of very modest changes attributable to preference because they're sort of halfway there anyway. The African data, which is calendar years, is the same data, but Africa is much more delayed at the beginning of that transition. Could that be an explanation?
No, you said elementary, so that's a very good question. And I think yes, we are capturing these fertility declines at different stages. Also different, and there's also maybe an historical period effect in itself, just simply being in the 20,000s to 2010s may be different than being in the 70s and 80s. So for various kinds of period shocks. So yeah, it's a very good point. I think I have to work out how we would control for that. To say, well, I know actually we could execute the non-SSA decomposition. We could truncate them. That'd be simple to do. Actually, just to redo our decomposition I showed you today, but stop them when they get down to 3.5 for 3 children or something, and see what the results look more like Africa. That's really that's too simple to do. I can do that. And by the way, I thought you were driving towards it. For me, one of the next questions I want to kind of wrestle with, which is more of a conceptual, not so much an empirical analysis question. So it's a question: why is Africa different so far, if it does? And I think actually in my field, there's generally the feeling that African fertility declines have been different in various ways. So there are really 2 schools of thought. One is simply a matter of, we call it economic development. That the country's, the social and economic changes haven't yet been sufficiently large, certainly as compared to most of the Asian countries, Latin American countries. So they're deficient when it comes to development. But another is that there are intrinsic features in these societies, especially kind of kinship systems and kinship processes, how roles of women and roles of children. So John Caldwell wrote a lot about kinship in Africa. It's a corporate kinship. Property is owned in common, all sorts of things. Kinship that is kind of pronatalist in its effect, and religious systems, maybe a more pronatal, although you could say every religious system has a pronatal side. But so that to me, it's a very interesting question. Is the African difference simply because it's lagging behind developmentally, or is it there are intrinsic features of African societies? And I'd like to, I don't know how one works on that empirically, but I can't mind writing an essay at least that works on that. I think a very interesting question, actually. Most people, observers do, I guess where I ought to talk to that.
Nick?
Yeah, I have one sort of open-ended question for you about what you think the role is, and if you think there's a role here of men's fertility desires.
Ah.
I think that there's, I mean, I'm not in my depth here, but I think it's plausible that in different societies, men's fertility desires will have different relationships with women's fertility desires. The most extreme case might be like fully coercive, right? So I guess I'm just asking, I'm wondering if you have looked at that, thought about it, and what role you think about that.
Well, I've not worked on it. There's less data. They survey sometimes interview men, usually they don't. But there are some that interview men. So one could replicate this with men or an indicator, male, female, or men, woman, spousal difference. I don't know. It'd be very interesting to pursue. I don't know that I have a hunch where that would show. Well, I don't think it would show dramatically different picture, but it might look a bit different. Where the literature at the moment shows the largest differential, I would say, is in the African societies. There's a lot of accounts that men are far more pronatalists than women in African societies, less so in Asia and Latin America. But definitely, and actually there's data, survey data, that shows that men want more children than women, sometimes like a couple of child on average, in sub-Saharan Africa.
I wanted to kind of challenge the framing of the conclusion where you're saying that the preference composition hasn't changed, therefore you kind of allied to desires, things like that. But preferences have changed. If we look at the average parity of people saying they want to stop presumably that's gone way down.
It has.
So it seems
I
to
looked at
me,
that, actually, it's gone way
Yeah.
down.
so it seems like you're putting a lot of weight into this preference composition thing, which is this hard to understand synthetic cross-sectional thing, whereas when we look at something easy to understand, at what parity do you want to stop, it's changed a lot. So why shouldn't we rely on something simple like that and instead go to this index of preference composition rather than something like,
Well, yes, I don't know if I disagree with you. I'd like to have an expression for period fertility. And the preference composition is, the expression I gave you, I think it's a fairly natural one to think of, to come up with. And honestly, if the results hadn't turned out so kind of crazy or surprising, one would probably wouldn't have any problem with that. But your point, as I conceded, I would now like to try to figure out how fertility target, as Ron calls it, how many children people want, which has changed, how that somehow connects to this. What's that doing? It sort of seems to be.
maybe I'll ask in reverse. If the average parity of one to stop has gone from 5 to 2, in what sense have things remained the same? What are you finding that is remaining the same?
Well, I guess the argument would be that it's gone from 5 to 2 because previously women at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 children who wanted to stop weren't, and now they are. So they're achieving their desire not to have any more children, and that's driven down parity. That would be the argument, something like that.
Okay, on that note, thank you everyone for coming. People who signed up for lunch, please stay.